Picture the most powerful engineer in America standing on top of his own dam. He inspects it from top to bottom, nods, and declares it safe. That same night, the whole thing lets go. This is the worst American engineering disaster most people have never heard of. And the ending has a twist that stayed buried for most of a century. I bet you won't see it coming. So, let me introduce you to William Mulholland. He landed in America as a broke Irish immigrant with no degree and no connections. His first job in Los Angeles was digging ditches for the water company. At night, he taught himself engineering out of borrowed textbooks. And here's the wild part. It worked. He climbed from ditch digger all the way up to chief engineer of the entire city water system. No diploma, no formal training, just decades of dirt, math, and pure stubbornness. His masterpiece was the Los Angeles Aqueduct, a concrete river, hundreds of miles long, carrying water across the desert and into the city. Los Angeles was a dusty little town when he started. The aqueduct turned it into a metropolis, and it turned Mulholland into something close to a living legend. But all that water had to come from somewhere. It came from farmers in the Owens Valley, who watched their land dry up while the city boomed. They were so furious that some of them started dynamiting the aqueduct, not once, repeatedly. So Mulholland made a plan. If people were going to blow up his aqueduct, the city needed backup water. He built a chain of emergency reservoirs around Los Angeles, and the crown jewel was a massive concrete dam in a quiet canyon north of the city, the St. Francis Dam. Now, here's the detail that should make you nervous. Mulholland designed it himself and supervised it himself. No outside expert ever reviewed the plans. And at the time, that was completely legal. During construction, he raised the dam's height twice, without widening the base to match. Imagine stacking a taller and taller bookshelf on the same small feet. The reservoir behind the dam took about 2 years to fill. As the water rose, cracks appeared in the concrete. Water seeped through the sides and around the edges. Mulholland shrugged it off. New concrete always cracks a little, he said. In early March of 1928, the reservoir reached full capacity for the very first time. Mulholland personally inspected his dam and pronounced it safe. That was the peak of his confidence. It lasted less than a week. A few mornings later, the dam keeper spotted a brand new leak. His name was Tony, and he lived right below the wall with his family. This leak was different. The water was running muddy. And why does muddy matter? Clear seepage means water is just sneaking through the concrete. Muddy water means it's chewing on the foundation itself. Tony picked up the phone and called Mulholland. Mulholland and his assistant drove out that same morning and looked everything over. Their verdict: the mud was washing in from elsewhere, not from the foundation. Nothing to worry about. They drove back to Los Angeles. The dam had hours left to live. That evening, the water level in the reservoir began to drop, quietly. No alarms, because there were no alarms. Just a gauge, ticking downward in the dark. Close to midnight, a carpenter rode his motorcycle up the canyon road, past the dam. Behind him, he heard a rumble, like rocks rolling down a hillside. Landslides were common around there, so he shrugged and rode on. He was the last person ever to see the St. Francis Dam standing. At roughly 2 minutes before midnight, the dam broke. Not a crack, not a partial failure, a total catastrophic collapse. And here's an eerie detail. Nobody actually witnessed it. We only know the exact moment because the collapse short-circuited a power station downstream. The blackout was recorded automatically. The disaster stamped its own time of death. A wall of water over 10 stories tall exploded down the canyon. The entire lake drained in less time than a feature film. The first thing in its path was a camp of sleeping workmen. Almost none of them survived. Tony the dam keeper and his family were among the very first victims. Then the flood kept going. Ranches, bridges, whole farm towns, swallowed one after another in the dark. The water moved faster than most people can run, and nearly everyone in its path was sound asleep. But this is also where the heroes show up. Telephone operators got word of the flood and stayed at their switchboards. They rang house after house, town after town, waking people ahead of the water. There were no sirens back then, no emergency broadcasts. Just a few women at switchboards, calling strangers in the middle of the night. A motorcycle cop named Thornton Edwards raced ahead of the flood, banging on doors. Locals started calling him the Paul Revere of Santa Paula. A night watchman named Ed Locke died trying to wake the workers at a camp downstream. Whole neighborhoods lived because of a handful of people like them. Still, the stories from that night are brutal. One man was ripped out of his house and survived by grabbing onto electrical wires. His wife and daughters did not make it. A young mother managed to save her little boy, but lost her husband and both daughters. And versions of that story repeated all the way down the valley. By dawn, the flood finally poured into the Pacific Ocean. It had traveled 54 miles. More than 400 people were dead. And the true number is probably higher, because many migrant farm workers were never officially counted. So, what happens to the great William Mulholland after something like this? He didn't run and he didn't hide. At the inquest, he took the stand and put the blame entirely on himself. "Don't blame anyone else," he told the jury. And then he said something chilling. "I envy the dead." Within months, his career was over. The self-taught immigrant who built Los Angeles retired in disgrace. He spent his last years in near seclusion, replaying that night in his head. And he died believing he had missed something a better engineer would have caught. The disaster changed everything. California passed a tough new dam safety law. Every major dam now had to answer to state inspectors. Engineers were finally required to be licensed before signing off on projects. And experts from several countries came together to set worldwide standards for dam safety. Modern dams are safer, in part, because this one failed. Oh, and there's one strange chapter in between. After the collapse, a single chunk of the dam stayed standing, alone in the canyon. People nicknamed it the Tombstone, and it became a morbid tourist attraction. That ended when a teenager fell to his death while climbing it. Reportedly, a friend had tossed a dead rattlesnake at him as a prank. The authorities dynamited the tombstone soon after. But here's the twist I promised you. For decades, the story stayed simple. An arrogant, self-taught engineer built a bad dam. Then, in the 1990s, a geologist went back to the site with modern tools, and he found something nobody in Mulholland's lifetime could have seen. The eastern side of the dam was anchored into an ancient landslide, a whole hillside that had already collapsed once, ages before humans ever arrived. The dam was literally leaning on ground that was built to fail, and no survey technique of the 1920s could have detected it. Now, that doesn't erase Mulholland's mistakes. The raised height, the ignored cracks, the one-man show, with no second opinion, but it does reframe the story. So, let me ask you, was he a villain or a man betrayed by the limits of his own era? Honestly, historians still argue about it. Today, the ruins are still scattered through that quiet canyon, and 91 years after the collapse, to the exact day, the site became a national memorial, a monument to the victims, and a warning written in broken concrete. Confidence is a fine thing in an engineer. Unchecked confidence is how you end up envying the dead. If this story got under your skin, tell me in the comments. What other disasters, or near disasters, should I draw next? See you in the next one.